The photo of my son and daughter-in-law sipping champagne on a Mediterranean cruise deck made my hands shake so violently I nearly dropped my phone. I stabbed the call button with fury that had been building for exactly 8 so. When Jessica answered with her usual fake sweet voice, I didn't waste time on pleasantries. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Shane Richardson. I'm 67 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I gave my son and his wife $13,000 of my Italy vacation fund because they claimed dangerous debt collectors were threatening their lives. Now I'm looking at cruise photos of them living it up in the Greek islands while I'm sitting in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, staring at my empty savings account. The call went straight to Jessica's voicemail, which didn't surprise me. She'd been avoiding my calls since last Tuesday when I'd asked for proof of these supposed debt collectors. My son Brandon had been equally evasive, suddenly too busy with work to return my messages. How convenient. I scrolled through more photos on Jessica's Instagram. There she was posing by the ship's pool in a designer bikini that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Brandon looked tanned and relaxed, holding up a lobster dinner that could have fed me for a week. The hashtags made my stomach turn. Blessed life, spontaneous vacation. Living our best life. Spontaneous vacation, my foot. You don't book a Mediterranean cruise overnight. This had been planned for months while they were bleeding me dry with their sob stories about Jessica's gambling debts and threatening phone calls from scary men. I'd been such a fool. But as I sat there staring at those photos, something Margaret always told me echoed in my mind. Shane, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Well, my son and his wife had just shown me exactly who they were, and I was finally ready to believe it. The doorbell rang, interrupting my rage spiral. I found Margaret on my porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone who had news. Good news, judging by the gleam in her eyes. You look like you're plotting something, she said, inviting herself in as usual. I love that look on you. I showed her the cruise photos without saying a word. Margaret's eyebrows climbed higher with each swipe. When she finished, she set down my phone and poured herself a generous glass of wine. Well, she said finally, I guess we know where your Italy money went. I trusted them, I said, though the words felt hollow now. Brandon looked me right in the eye and swore Jessica's life was in danger. Honey, the only thing in danger was their vacation fund. Margaret took a long sip of wine. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I stared at those photos again, feeling something shift inside me. The old Shane would have cried, blamed himself, maybe written them an angry letter they'd never read. But the man, looking at evidence of his son's betrayal, felt something entirely different. A cold, calculating fury that demanded action. I'm going to make them regret ever thinking they could play me for a fool, I said quietly. Margaret raised her glass in a toast. Now that's the Shane I remember from our teaching days, the one who made Tommy Morrison cry when he tried to cheat on his spelling test. I picked up my phone and started typing a text message to Brandon. Short, sweet, and guaranteed to ruin his vacation buzz. Saw the cruise photos. We need to talk when you get back. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. I could practically feel his panic through the screen. Good. Let him sweat for the rest of his precious vacation. He had no idea what was waiting for him when he got home. But I was wrong about everything. 3 months earlier, I'd been sitting in this same kitchen, surrounded by travel brochures and feeling more excited than I had since Jan died. Italy had always been our dream destination, the trip we'd promised ourselves we'd take when I retired. Cancer had other plans. Now at 67, I was finally ready to honor that promise to myself. I'd saved meticulously for 2 years, adding every spare dollar to my Italy fund until I had enough for the 3-week tour Jan and I had fantasized about. Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Tuscany's rolling hills. I was going to see it all. I spread the final itinerary across my kitchen table like a treasure map. September in Italy would be perfect. Warm but not scorching, fewer crowds, that golden light I'd seen in travel magazines. I'd even bought a new camera, something Jan would have teased me about since I'd always claimed her old Kodak was perfectly fine. The trip wasn't just about sightseeing, though. It was about proving to myself that I could still have adventures, that being widowed didn't mean my life was over. Brandon and Jessica had made enough comments about me staying closer to home at my age that I'd started to believe them. This trip was my rebellion against their expectations. Brandon had seemed supportive when I first mentioned it, though Jessica's smile had been tighter than usual. That's a lot of money for one person, she'd said, not quite managing to hide the calculation in her eyes. I mean, wouldn't it be more practical to do something local? I should have paid attention to that moment. Jessica never worried about my practical spending unless it interfered with her own plans. But I was too caught up in my excitement to notice the way she and Brandon exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The signs had been there for months. Really, the casual comments about my fixed income, the suggestions that I was being reckless with my finances, the way they'd started treating my modest inheritance from Jan like it was community property. Jan had been a careful woman who'd left me comfortable but not wealthy. The Italy trip would take a significant chunk of my discretionary savings, and somehow Brandon and Jessica had convinced themselves that money should be theirs to influence. I remember calling Margaret after one particularly uncomfortable dinner where Jessica had spent the entire evening criticizing the restaurant I'd chosen as too expensive for what you get. Margaret had listened to my venting with the patience of a woman who'd known me for 40 years. "Shane," she'd said finally, "that girl is already spending your money in her head. Mark my words." I'd laughed it off then. Brandon was my son, the little boy I'd raised to be honest and kind. Yes, he'd married a woman who was more high maintenance than I'd have chosen, but that didn't make him a thief. Family didn't steal from family. The travel agent had been so enthusiastic when I'd made the final payment. "Mr. Richardson, you're going to have the time of your life," she'd gushed. "September is absolutely magical in Italy. You picked the perfect time." I'd walked out of her office feeling invincible, like I was finally taking control of my own story. The Italy trip represented everything I wanted to reclaim about myself. Independence, adventure, the courage to live fully despite loss. Now looking back, I realize that's exactly when Brandon and Jessica started their campaign in earnest. The phone calls became more frequent, always with some new financial crisis that required immediate attention. Jessica's mysterious health problems that needed expensive treatments, Brandon's car troubles that couldn't wait for their next paycheck. I'd helped with small amounts here and there, telling myself it was temporary, that they'd pay me back. But each request got a little bigger, a little more urgent, a little more emotionally manipulative, and I, desperate to be needed by my son, had fallen for every single lie. The cruel irony was that they'd trained me to be their personal ATM, using my own love against me. Every dollar I gave them was proof that I was a good father, a supportive family member, someone worth keeping around. I thought I was buying their affection, but I was actually financing my own betrayal. That's when I realized how deep their lies really went. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing my Italy packing list. Brandon's voice was shaky, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. My paternal instincts kicked in immediately, pushing aside the nagging doubts that had been growing stronger each day. "Dad, I need your help," he said without preamble. "Jessica's in serious trouble." I set down my coffee cup, my attention completely focused. What kind of trouble? "She owes money to some very dangerous people. Gambling debts. They're threatening to hurt her if she doesn't pay by Friday." The words hit me like a physical blow. Gambling debts. Jessica had never mentioned gambling beyond the occasional lottery ticket. But the terror in Brandon's voice was real, and my son had never been a good liar, or so I'd thought. "How much money?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be devastating. $13,000. His voice broke on the number. "Dad, I know it's a lot, but these people, they're not playing games. They showed up at our house yesterday. Jessica's been hiding in the bedroom ever since." $13,000, almost exactly the amount I had saved for Italy. The coincidence should have been a red flag, but my brain was too flooded with fear for my family to think clearly. Images of Jessica being hurt, of my son, helpless to protect his wife, overwhelmed any logical skepticism. "Brandon, have you gone to the police?" "And tell them what? That my wife owes money to loan sharks? They'll just say it's a civil matter until someone gets hurt." "Dad, I'm scared, really scared." I could hear him crying, my strong, capable son, reduced to tears by circumstances beyond his control. The sound broke something in me. This was my child, my baby boy, who used to run to me when he had nightmares. If he needed me, I would move mountains to help him. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "Okay, we'll figure this out. How did Jessica even get involved with these people?" "It started small," Brandon explained. "Online poker, sports betting. She said she was just having fun, blowing off steam, but then she started losing. And instead of stopping, she kept doubling down, trying to win back what she'd lost. You know how she gets when she's stressed." I did know. Jessica had always been the type to shop when upset, to make impulsive decisions when feeling overwhelmed. It wasn't that hard to believe she'd gotten in over her head with gambling. People made poor choices when they were struggling. "The guys who came to the house yesterday weren't exactly subtle," Brandon continued. "They made it very clear what would happen if Jessica doesn't pay. Dad, I can't lose her. I can't." The desperation in his voice sealed my fate. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about protecting my family. The Italy trip suddenly seemed selfish, frivolous, compared to my daughter-in-law's safety. I could always take another vacation, but I couldn't replace Jessica if something happened to her. "I have some savings," I said slowly, "the money I'd put aside for my trip. Dad, I can't ask you to give up Italy for us." But he wasn't really protesting, was he? If he'd truly been against taking my vacation money, he would have hung up and found another solution. Instead, he waited in silence while I talked myself into sacrificing my dreams for their crisis. Family comes first, I said, echoing the values Jan and I had tried to instill in him. Italy will still be there next year. Dad, you're saving our lives. I swear we'll pay you back as soon as possible with interest. Of course they would. Brandon was a good boy, raised right. He understood the value of money and the importance of keeping promises. This was just a temporary emergency, a one-time crisis that required extraordinary measures. I should have demanded proof. Photographs of these threatening men, copies of the debt documentation, something tangible beyond my son's panicked phone call. But I was too busy being the father he needed me to be, too focused on playing my role in their drama to ask the hard questions. I'll transfer the money today, I promised. But Brandon, Jessica needs to get help for this gambling problem. This can't happen again. Absolutely. We've already looked into counseling programs. She's going to get the help she needs. Such reasonable words. Such sensible plans. My son sounded like he had everything under control except for this one unfortunate situation. I felt proud of him for handling the crisis so maturely, for protecting his wife while also taking steps to prevent future problems. I hung up feeling like a hero, the good father who'd stepped up when his family needed him most. Sure, I'd have to postpone my Italian adventure, but wasn't sacrifice what love was all about? Jan would have done the same thing if she'd been alive. Within an hour, I transferred $13,000 to Brandon's account and called my travel agent to cancel my trip. The cancellation fees were substantial, but compared to Jessica's safety, money seemed meaningless. I spent the rest of the day feeling righteously satisfied with my decision. When Margaret called that evening, I told her about the family emergency with the gravity of someone who diverted a disaster. Gambling debts? Margaret had sounded skeptical. Since when does Jessica gamble? Apparently it started small and got out of hand. It happens to more people than you'd think. And these debt collectors just happened to demand exactly the amount you had saved for Italy. Margaret, I know what you're thinking, but Brandon was genuinely terrified. You should have heard his voice. If you say so, honey, I just hope those two appreciate what you've given up for them. I was sure they would. How could they not? I'd literally saved Jessica's life and preserved their marriage. They'd probably spend the rest of their lives grateful for my sacrifice. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The thank you text from Brandon came 3 hours after I'd transferred the money. Dad, you're an angel. Jessica's safe now. We love you so much. Short, sweet, and exactly what I needed to hear. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe normally. My family was safe, and I'd been the one to protect them. The Italy money was gone, but Jessica would be alive to thank me in person. I spent the next few days in a strange state of emotional suspension. Part of me mourned the loss of my Italian adventure, but a bigger part felt genuinely proud of what I'd done. When people asked about my upcoming trip, I told them about the family emergency with the quiet dignity of someone who'd made a noble sacrifice. Margaret wasn't buying it. She kept dropping by with increasingly pointed questions about Jessica's mysterious gambling problem and the convenient timing of the crisis. But I was determined to give Brandon and Jessica the benefit of the doubt. Family loyalty meant something, even if it cost me my dream vacation. At least they'll pay you back with interest, Margaret said during one of her visits, though I noticed they haven't mentioned exactly when that might happen. They need time to get back on their feet, I defended. $13,000 is a lot of money to repay quickly. It's also a lot of money to lose gambling, especially for someone who supposedly just started playing online poker. I changed the subject, but Margaret's words lingered. When had Jessica started gambling? Brandon had been vague about the timeline, and I realized I'd never actually heard Jessica mention any interest in poker or sports betting, but people had private hobbies, didn't they? Maybe she'd been embarrassed about her new pastime. Still, curiosity got the better of me. On Thursday, I called Brandon to check on how they were handling the aftermath of their crisis. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Jessica's number with the same result. By Friday, I was starting to worry again. What if the debt collectors had come back? What if $13,000 hadn't been enough? Saturday morning brought another text from Brandon, taking Jessica away for a few days to help her decompress from the stress. Thanks again for everything, Dad. You saved our marriage. A few days away sounded therapeutic. Jessica had been through a traumatic experience, and Brandon was being a supportive husband by helping her recover somewhere peaceful. I felt a warm glow of satisfaction, thinking about how my sacrifice had made their healing possible. It wasn't until Monday that I started to feel genuinely uneasy. Still, no phone calls, no updates on Jessica's recovery, or their plans for getting counseling. When I drove past their house, I noticed their mail was piling up, and their lawn sprinkler system wasn't running. That was unlike Brandon, who was usually meticulous about home maintenance. Tuesday afternoon, I broke down and called Brandon's office. His assistant sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Mr. Richardson, didn't Brandon tell you? He took 2 weeks of vacation time, said it was a last-minute family situation." 2 weeks. Brandon had never taken 2 consecutive weeks off in his entire career. He was the type who checked emails from his deathbed. Something about this extended absence didn't add up. Did he mention where they were going? Not specifically, but he seemed excited about it. Said something about it being a once-in-a-lifetime trip. A once-in-a-lifetime trip. The phrase hit me like a slap. That's exactly how I described Italy to everyone who would listen. My once-in-a-lifetime trip that I'd sacrificed to save Jessica from imaginary debt collectors. I drove straight to Margaret's house, probably breaking several traffic laws in the process. She took one look at my face and poured me a glass of wine without asking what was wrong. "They're gone," I said without preamble. Brandon took 2 weeks off work for a once-in-a-lifetime trip that he never mentioned to me. Margaret set down her own glass. "Gone where?" "I don't know, but it's starting to feel like they use my money for their own vacation while I'm sitting here worried about Jessica's gambling debts that probably never existed." "Oh, honey." Margaret's expression was a mixture of sympathy and rage. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find out exactly where they went and what they did with my money." It took less than an hour of internet detective work to find what I was looking for. Jessica, bless her heart, had never met a social media platform she didn't love. Her Instagram account was set to private, but her Facebook page was wide open for the world to see. The photos I found would change everything. The first photo showed up in my Facebook feed at exactly 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday, and it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Jessica, radiant in a flowing white sundress, standing at the bow of a cruise ship with the Mediterranean sparkling behind her. The caption read, "Day one of our dream cruise, couldn't be more grateful for this amazing surprise." My hands shook as I scrolled through the rest. Brandon feeding Jessica chocolate-covered strawberries by the pool. Jessica posing with a champagne flute against a sunset that could only be the Greek islands. Brandon in a tuxedo at what looked like a formal dinner, grinning like he'd won the lottery, which I supposed he had. $13,000 of my carefully saved Italy money had bought them a luxury Mediterranean cruise. The same cruise I'd looked at months ago and dismissed as too expensive for my budget. They were literally living my dream vacation while I sat in my kitchen in Portland, staring at empty savings accounts and feeling like the world's biggest fool. The worst part was Jessica's obvious joy in every photo. This wasn't a woman recovering from trauma or dealing with dangerous debt collectors. This was a woman celebrating what she clearly considered the coup of her lifetime. She'd manipulated her father-in-law out of $13,000 and was documenting her victory for the world to see. I scrolled back through her photos from the past month, looking for any hint of the gambling problem that had supposedly threatened her life. Nothing. No mentions of poker nights, no sports betting references, no signs of the stress and fear that Brandon had described so convincingly. Just the usual stream of restaurant meals, shopping trips, and complaints about being bored. My phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I answered without thinking. "Shane, are you okay? You sounded upset when you left here." "They're on a cruise," I said, my voice strangely calm. "A Mediterranean cruise that I paid for while they told me it was to save Jessica from loan sharks." The silence on Margaret's end spoke volumes. When she finally responded, her voice was tight with anger. "Those calculating little thieves. How could Brandon do this to you?" "I don't know." But even as I said it, I realized that wasn't entirely true. I did know. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Brandon had been testing my boundaries for years, asking for money with increasingly elaborate stories. The car that needed emergency repairs, Jessica's medical bills that insurance somehow wouldn't cover, the business opportunity that required immediate investment. Each time I'd written the check and believed the explanation cause I wanted to believe my son was a good man who just had bad luck. But good men don't steal their father's dream vacations. Good men don't traumatize their fathers with fake stories about their wives being threatened by criminals. Good men don't document their fraud on social media while their victims sit at home worried sick about their safety. "What are you going to do?" Margaret asked. I stared at the latest photo Jessica had posted, her and Brandon toasting each other at dinner, both looking tan and relaxed and utterly content with their betrayal. The caption read, "So grateful my husband surprised me with this incredible trip. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones you never planned." Surprise trip. Of course, that's how she'd frame it. Jessica probably had no idea her husband had stolen the money from his father. In her mind, Brandon was the generous husband who'd spontaneously whisked her away on a romantic cruise. She got to play the grateful wife while I played the fool. I'm going to make them pay, I said quietly. Good. Do you want me to come over? Not yet. I need to think about this. Really think about the best way to handle it. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at those photos until my eyes burned. The rage was building slowly, like a storm gathering strength offshore. These people had looked me in the eye and lied. They'd used my love for Brandon against me, weaponized my desire to help family, turned my generosity into their personal windfall. The old Shane would have called Brandon immediately, crying and demanding explanations. He would have given him the chance to spin another story, to manipulate my emotions again, to somehow make this betrayal seem like a misunderstanding. But the man looking at evidence of his son's theft felt something entirely different. Cold, calculating fury that demanded more than tears and confrontations. They'd played me for a fool, stolen my dreams, and documented their victory like it was something to celebrate. If they wanted to play games with my money, I was going to teach them a lesson about consequences they'd never forget. The next photo showed them parasailing over crystal blue water. Jessica's arms spread wide like she was embracing the world, my money, my sacrificed dreams. I took a screenshot of every single photo, building an evidence file of their betrayal. By the time I was finished, I had documentation of every meal, every excursion, every moment of joy they'd stolen from me. They thought they were so clever, posting their fraud for everyone to see. They had no idea they'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy them. What I discovered next made my blood run cold. The credit card statement arrived in my mailbox Thursday morning, and at first, I almost threw it away without opening it. It was for the card I kept for emergencies, the one I rarely used and usually carried a zero balance. But something made me tear open the envelope. Maybe the same instinct that had been warning me about Brandon and Jessica for months. The balance was $4,472. I stared at the number, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. I hadn't used this card in over 6 months. The last charge had been for a new washing machine when mine died unexpectedly. So, how was there nearly $5,000 in charges I'd never made? My hands shook as I scanned the line items. Airline tickets to Miami, travel insurance, shore excursion packages in Santorini and Mykonos, ship-to-shore Wi-Fi packages. Every single charge was dated from the week before Brandon's panicked phone call about Jessica's supposed gambling debts. They hadn't just stolen my Italy money, they'd used my credit card to enhance their stolen vacation, adding expensive excursions and upgrades, while I sat at home worrying about Jessica's safety. The timeline made sickening sense now. Brandon had planned this cruise for weeks, maybe months. The gambling debt story was just a cover to extract the cash they needed for the basic cruise package. I called the credit card company with fingers that could barely dial the numbers. The customer service representative was sympathetic but firm. All the charges had been made with the correct security codes and billing zip code. Someone with access to my complete card information had used it, and that someone had known exactly when I'd be distracted enough not to check my statements. "Do you have any family members who might have access to your card information?" The representative asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I do." Brandon had helped me organize my finances after Jan died. He'd sat in my kitchen, going through every bank account and credit card, helping me set up online access and automatic payments. He'd written down all my passwords and security information for emergencies. I thought it was sweet, the way he wanted to protect me from financial confusion during my grief. Now I realized it had been reconnaissance. I hung up and immediately called my bank. The checking account showed 2 additional unauthorized transfers in the past month, both to online gambling sites. Small amounts, just a few hundred each, but the pattern was clear. Brandon had been testing my security, seeing how long it would take me to notice unusual activity. When I didn't catch the gambling charges, he'd felt confident enough to go for the big score. The cruelest part was the gambling story itself. He'd actually used my credit card to place small bets online, creating a paper trail that would support his lies if I ever got suspicious. If I demanded proof of Jessica's gambling problem, he could have shown me my own bank statements as evidence. My son had stolen from me, lied to me, and framed me for the very crime he was committing. The boy I'd raised to value honesty and integrity had become a master manipulator who viewed his own father as nothing more than a source of income to be exploited. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the evidence of their betrayal, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about respect, about family, about the basic human decency that Brandon and Jessica clearly thought I didn't deserve. They'd made a crucial mistake, though. They'd gotten greedy. If they'd stuck to stealing my Italy money, I might have eventually forgiven them. Family loyalty runs deep, and I'd already proven I was willing to sacrifice my dreams for their supposed needs. But the credit card charges showed a level of premeditation and contempt that couldn't be explained away. This wasn't a desperate son making a poor choice in a moment of crisis. This was calculated theft by someone who'd studied my financial habits and deliberately exploited them. Someone who'd sat in my kitchen, accepted my trust and help, and planned my destruction while smiling to my face. Margaret arrived within minutes of my phone call, took one look at the credit card statement, and said exactly what I was thinking.
That son of a...
It gets worse, was I said, showing her the bank records. He's been stealing from me for weeks, maybe months, small amounts, testing to see if I'd notice. And now they're living it up on your dime while posting photos of their perfect vacation. I nodded, feeling that cold fury crystallize into something harder and more focused. Margaret, I need your help. I'm going to make them pay for this, but I need to be smart about it. No more emotional reactions. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. What do you need? I need to know everything about that cruise. Where they're going, when they're coming back, what they've planned for when they get home. And I need to know it without them realizing I'm investigating. Margaret smiled, and for the first time in days, I felt like I might actually win this fight. Honey, you've come to the right person. I didn't spend 40 years teaching high school without learning how to catch cheaters. We spent the next 3 hours building a complete picture of their vacation timeline. The cruise was 12 days, returning to Miami on Saturday morning. They'd booked a hotel for Saturday night, probably to recover from the trip before flying home Sunday, which meant they'd be walking through their front door Sunday evening, still glowing from their stolen vacation and expecting me to welcome them home like the grateful father who'd saved their marriage. They had no idea I'd spent the week uncovering every detail of their betrayal. They didn't know about the credit card statements or the banking records or the carefully documented timeline that proved their guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Most importantly, they had no idea what I was planning for their homecoming. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. Sunday evening arrived with the punctuality of a funeral service. I'd spent the entire weekend preparing for Brandon and Jessica's homecoming, and by 6:30, I was positioned in my living room chair with a clear view of their driveway. Margaret sat beside me, armed with a thermos of coffee and the grim satisfaction of someone about to witness justice. "You sure you don't want me to stay for the actual confrontation?" she asked for the third time. "I need to handle this alone," I said, watching their house for signs of life. "But thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." At 7:15, Brandon's Honda pulled into their driveway. Even from my window, I could see they were both tan and relaxed, moving with the lazy contentment of people who just returned from the vacation of a lifetime. My vacation, my $13,000 plus $4,000 in credit card charges I was still disputing. Jessica stretched like a cat in the passenger seat, probably working out the kinks from their long travel day. Brandon pulled suitcases from the trunk, both of them laughing at something I couldn't hear. They looked like any other couple returning from a romantic getaway, not thieves who'd spent 2 weeks spending stolen money. I waited exactly 30 minutes before walking across the street and ringing their doorbell, just long enough for them to start unpacking, to relax into the comfortable assumption that they'd gotten away with it. Brandon answered the door, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to welcome you home," I said pleasantly. "I've been so worried about Jessica. How is she feeling after her traumatic experience with those debt collectors?" For just a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then I watched him remember the lie he'd told, the performance he'd have to continue. "She's doing much better. The time away really helped her recover." "I'm so glad to hear that. May I come in? I brought some photos I thought you might enjoy seeing." Jessica appeared behind Brandon, looking every bit as sun-kissed and relaxed as her social media photos had suggested. "Shane, what a nice surprise. You didn't need to come check on us." "Oh, but I did," I said, stepping into their living room uninvited. "I have so much to share with you both." I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the screenshots I'd saved from Jessica's Facebook page. I was so relieved to see that Jessica was safe and healthy. In fact, she looked absolutely radiant in all her vacation photos. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went white, then red, then white again. Brandon looked like he was trying to solve a complex math problem in his head, probably calculating how much trouble they were actually in. "I can explain," Brandon started, but I held up my hand. "Oh, I'm sure you can. You're quite talented at explanations, but first let me show you some of my own photos." I pulled out the credit card statements and bank records I'd printed and organized. "These are pictures of charges made to my accounts while you were supposedly dealing with Jessica's gambling crisis. Airline tickets, shore excursions, ship Wi-Fi packages, all purchased with my credit card information during the week before you called me about Jessica's life-threatening debt." Brandon sat down heavily on his couch. Jessica remained standing, but I could see her hands shaking. "Dad, I can explain everything," Brandon tried again. "It's not what it looks like. Really, Because it looks like you planned a Mediterranean cruise, realized you couldn't afford it, and decided to steal the money from your father. It looks like you used my credit card without permission to enhance your stolen vacation. It looks like you traumatized me with fake stories about your wife being threatened by criminals while you were actually booking dinner reservations and spa treatments. Jessica finally found her voice. Shane, you don't understand the whole situation. Then please enlighten me. Help me understand how stealing $13,000 from your father-in-law somehow makes sense. The fight went out of Brandon all at once. His shoulders slumped, and he looked like the guilty little boy I remembered from his childhood, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. We needed the vacation. Our marriage was falling apart, and we thought time away might help us reconnect. So you decided I should pay for your marriage counseling cruise. We were going to pay you back, Jessica added quickly. We just needed some time to get our finances sorted out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money, Brandon? I've seen your credit report. You're maxed out on every card you have. You're behind on your mortgage, your car payment, and apparently your student loans. You can't afford to pay me back because you can't afford anything. That's when the real truth finally came out. You think we don't deserve nice things because we're not perfect with money? Jessica's mask of remorse slipped completely, revealing the entitled woman I'd suspected was hiding underneath. You have more money than you could spend in your lifetime, sitting in your house collecting dust while you obsess over your stupid Italy trip. Jessica, Brandon warned, but she was past caring about maintaining their facade. No, Brandon, I'm tired of pretending. Your father acts like we're criminals for needing help, but he's the one hoarding money while his own family struggles. He could have paid for that cruise 10 times over without missing a meal. The audacity took my breath away. Hoarding money? I worked for 43 years as a teacher, saved every penny I could, and lived modestly so I could enjoy my retirement? That's not hoarding, that's planning. And what good did all that planning do you? Jessica shot back. You sit in that house by yourself talking to your neighbor about trips you're too scared to actually take. At least we used the money to create memories. You used stolen money to create memories, I corrected. And apparently you think that's acceptable because I'm old and alone and couldn't possibly have dreams worth respecting? Brandon finally tried to regain control of the conversation. Dad, Jessica's upset. She doesn't mean... Oh, I mean every word, Jessica interrupted. Your father guilts you every chance he gets, makes you feel responsible for his loneliness, and then acts like the victim when we finally ask for help. He's been manipulating you for years. The projection was breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd helped steal $17,000 from me, and she was calling me the manipulator. But her outburst was also revealing something I'd suspected, but never been able to prove. This hadn't been Brandon's idea originally. Interesting perspective, I said calmly. Tell me, Jessica, whose idea was it to use my credit card for the vacation extras? She glanced at Brandon, realizing too late that she'd said more than she intended. That's not relevant. I think it is. See, I've been wondering how Brandon got access to my complete financial information. Yes, he helped me organize my accounts after Jan died, but the credit card I used for emergencies was never part of that conversation. That card stayed in my wallet, and the only time anyone else handled it was... I paused, watching their faces as the memory came back to me. Last Christmas, when Jessica offered to help me pay for dinner at that expensive restaurant, she took my card to the register while I was in the bathroom. Brandon looked at his wife with something that might have been surprise or betrayal. Hard to tell which. You photographed my card information while I continued. Probably the front and back, maybe even the security code on the back. That's how you knew my zip code, my full card number, everything you needed to make online purchases. You can't prove that, Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can, I said. I called the credit card company and requested detailed information about where those charges originated. IP addresses, device information, geographical location. Would you like to guess where the airline tickets were purchased? The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Brandon was staring at Jessica now with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry exactly, but calculating, like he was finally seeing his wife clearly for the first time. From this house, I continued. On your home computer, Jessica, which means you've been planning this theft for months, waiting for the right opportunity to steal a large amount of money from me. That's enough, Brandon said quietly, but he wasn't talking to me. Jessica must have heard something dangerous in his voice because her attitude shifted abruptly. Brandon, honey, don't let him turn us against each other. We're a team, remember? It's us against the world. Is it? Brandon asked. Because right now it feels like you used me to steal from my father, and you're expecting me to cover for you. The dynamic in the room was changing in real time. Jessica had overplayed her hand, revealed too much about her role in planning the theft. Brandon might be a liar and a thief, but he was also realizing he'd been manipulated by his wife just as thoroughly as I had. "You planned this," he said to Jessica, his voice getting stronger. "The gambling debt story, using Dad's card, all of it. This wasn't a desperate mistake, it was a calculated con." "Don't be ridiculous." Jessica tried to laugh. "We planned it together." "No, we didn't. I wanted to ask Dad for a loan for the cruise. You said he'd never agree to pay for something that expensive, that we needed a better story. You came up with the gambling debt idea. I watched my son piece together his wife's manipulation with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Jessica was finally being exposed for what she was. Sadness because Brandon was realizing his marriage might be built on lies, just as elaborate as the ones they'd told me. But none of this absolved him of his choices. He might have been manipulated by his wife, but he'd still looked me in the eye and lied. He'd still terrorized me with fake stories about Jessica's safety. He'd still chosen his wife's schemes over his father's trust. That's when I delivered the knockout punch. "The good news," I said, pulling out a manila folder I'd been saving for this moment, "is that I've already taken care of everything." Brandon and Jessica exchanged glances, probably wondering if I meant I'd forgiven them or called the police. The truth was more elegant than either option. "You see, when I discovered your theft, I had a choice. I could report you to the authorities, which would likely result in criminal charges and definitely destroy what's left of our family relationship. Or I could handle this privately, in a way that ensures you never steal from me again, while also protecting Brandon from the worst consequences of his poor judgment." I opened the folder and spread its contents across their coffee table. Bank statements, legal documents, correspondence with credit card companies, and most importantly, a detailed accounting of every dollar they'd stolen. $17,437, I said. "That's the total amount you took from me, including the cruise cost, credit card charges, and the fraudulent gambling transactions you used to create your false narrative." Jessica leaned forward to examine the documents, her face growing paler with each page. "What is all this?" "Evidence, documentation, a complete paper trail of your theft with timestamps, IP addresses, and bank records that prove exactly what you did and when you did it." I smiled pleasantly. "Dad," Brandon started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. As I said, I had a choice about how to handle this, and I chose the option that protects my interests while giving you both a chance to avoid criminal prosecution." I pulled out the final document, a legal agreement I'd had drafted by Margaret's lawyer nephew. "This is a promissory note for the full amount you stole, plus interest, to be repaid over the next 2 years. The payments are calculated based on Brandon's current salary, so I know they're manageable if you adjust your lifestyle accordingly." Brandon picked up this promissory note, scanning its terms with growing alarm. 2 years, Dad. This payment schedule is huge. We'll have to cut everything." "Yes, you will. No more expensive dinners, no more shopping sprees, no more vacations you can't afford. You'll live like the working class people you actually are, instead of the wealthy couple you've been pretending to be, with my money." "And if we refuse to sign?" Jessica asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Then I file a police report tomorrow morning. Credit card fraud, elder financial abuse, theft by deception. Margaret's nephew assures me that with this level of documentation, prosecution would be straightforward. You'd likely face felony charges, Brandon would lose his job, and you'd both have criminal records that would follow you for the rest of your lives." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of their mantel clock. I could see them weighing their options, calculating whether they could somehow talk their way out of this, or find a third alternative that didn't involve consequences. "There's one more thing," I added. "The promissory note includes a provision that if you miss even one payment, the entire balance becomes due immediately, and I'm free to pursue criminal charges retroactively." So this isn't just about paying me back. It's about proving you've learned to live within your means. Jessica was reading over Brandon's shoulder now, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "This is vindictive, Shane. You're destroying our quality of life over money you don't even need." "I'm protecting myself from future theft," I corrected, "and teaching you both that actions have consequences. You chose to steal from me, so now you get to live with the results of that choice." "We could fight this," Jessica said. "Claim you gave us the money willingly." "You could try, but you'd have to explain the credit card fraud, the forged gambling transactions, and the elaborate lies about debt collectors. Plus, I have recordings of some very interesting conversations." That wasn't entirely true, but their guilty expressions suggested they weren't sure what conversations I might have documented. "Let them worry about it." Brandon set down the promissory note and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Respect, not affection, not gratitude, but the acknowledgement that I was someone to be taken seriously. "You've thought of everything," he said quietly. "I've learned to protect myself," I replied, something I should have done years ago. Jessica was still trying to find an angle, some way to negotiate better terms. "What about the cruise? We can't undo that. Shouldn't we get some credit for the money that's already spent?" "You should get credit for memories you created with stolen money." I laughed. "No, Jessica. You get to pay for every penny you stole. And every time you look at those vacation photos, you'll remember exactly what they cost our family." That's when Brandon asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What happens after we pay you back? Do we have a relationship anymore? Or is this just business?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd chosen to become a liar and a thief. The boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. The teenager who'd promised to take care of me when I got old. The adult who'd stolen my dreams to fund his wife's fantasies. "That depends," I said finally, "on whether you prove you're capable of being the man I tried to raise you to be." But neither of us was prepared for what Jessica said next. "Fine," Jessica said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We'll sign your precious contract and pay back every penny, but don't pretend this makes you the victim." She turned her glare on me. "Shane, you want to know the truth? We've been supporting you emotionally for years while you drained us financially." Brandon looked at his wife like she'd lost her mind. "Jessica, what are you talking about?" "Your father," she continued, turning to face me directly, "has been guilt-tripping you about money and attention for years. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, it's been about how lonely he is, how worried he is about his finances, how he sacrifices for everyone else. He trained you to feel responsible for his happiness, then acts shocked when we actually need help." The lies were breathtaking in their audacity. "I've never asked Brandon for financial support," I said evenly. "No, you just make comments about how expensive things are, how fixed incomes don't stretch, how you don't know how you'll afford home repairs. You manipulate through martyrdom, then play innocent when people respond to your hints." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. These weren't random accusations. Jessica was describing specific conversations, private moments between me and Brandon that I'd thought were normal father-son exchanges about life's challenges. "You've been telling her about our private conversations," I said to Brandon. He had the grace to look ashamed. "She's my wife, Dad. We talk about everything. Everything, including how your father mentions needing a new roof or worrying about property taxes or wondering how he'll afford to maintain that big house by himself." Jessica's voice was gaining momentum. "You share all of it with me, and then you feel guilty because you can't afford to help him with every little problem." "That's not manipulation," I protested. "That's normal conversation between family members." "Is it, or is it a pattern of making your son feel responsible for problems he can't solve?" Jessica pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "Brandon, remember what you told me after Thanksgiving about how guilty you felt because your dad mentioned the heating bill being higher than expected?" Brandon's face flushed. "Jessica, don't..." "Or what about when he mentioned that cruise prices had gone up and he might have to wait another year for Italy? You felt terrible because you knew he'd been saving forever, but you also knew we couldn't afford to give him thousands of dollars." I stared at my son, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "You felt obligated to help me afford Italy. You seemed so disappointed," Brandon said quietly. "You'd worked so hard to save for that trip, and then prices increased right when you were ready to book. You didn't ask for money directly, but you heard it as a request for help," I finished. "And when you couldn't afford to help, you felt guilty. So when the opportunity came up to borrow the money temporarily," Jessica continued, "it felt like we were solving your problem and ours at the same time. You'd get your Italy trip eventually, and we'd get the vacation our marriage needed." The reinterpretation of events was masterful and completely wrong, but I could see how it might have worked on Brandon's conscience. Jessica had taken his genuine love for me and twisted it into something that justified theft. She'd made him believe that stealing my money was actually a favor to me. "Except you weren't borrowing," I pointed out. "You were stealing, and you had no intention of telling me the truth or paying me back." "We would have paid you back," Brandon insisted, "eventually." "With what money? You're barely making your current bills." That's when Jessica played her final card. "With the money we'll inherit when you die." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Brandon went white, staring at his wife like she'd revealed herself to be a stranger. I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. "Excuse me? Come on, Shane. You're 67 years old. Statistically, you have maybe 15 years left. That house, your savings, your retirement accounts, it's all going to Brandon anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline a little bit." Jessica, Brandon whispered, but she was beyond stopping now. Your money is going to be ours eventually, so what's the difference if we use some of it now when we actually need it? At least this way we get to enjoy it together instead of waiting for you to die first. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of their refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, but inside the room, nothing moved except the slow destruction of whatever relationship we'd had left. Brandon was staring at Jessica like he was seeing her for the first time. You planned this based on inheriting Dad's money when he dies. I planned this based on reality, Jessica shot back. Your father isn't going to live forever, and when he's gone, we'll need that money for our own retirement. I just suggested we treat it like an advance on our inheritance. An advance you decided to take without asking, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Would you have said yes if we'd asked? Absolutely not. Exactly. So, we took what we needed and planned to replace it before you noticed. If you hadn't been so obsessive about checking your accounts, this never would have been a problem. I looked at this woman my son had married, this person who'd helped steal my money while justifying it as advance payment on my death. And I realized I'd been far too generous in my punishment. Jessica, I said quietly, you've just made a very expensive mistake. That's when I told them what was really going to happen. I set down the promissory note and pulled out a different document from my folder. I'm afraid there's been a change in plans. Brandon and Jessica both leaned forward, sensing that whatever came next was going to be worse than what they'd expected. You see, Jessica, when you mentioned inheriting my money, you revealed something crucial about your motivation for this theft. You didn't steal from me because you were desperate or made a poor decision in a moment of crisis. You stole from me because you consider my assets to be yours by right, just not available on your preferred timeline. I unfolded the new document and placed it on their coffee table. This is a revised version of my will drafted this morning after I spoke with my attorney about our situation. Brandon's face went ashen. Dad, what did you do? I protected my assets from future theft. The original will left everything to you, Brandon, because I believed you were an honest man who would honor my memory by using that inheritance responsibly. Recent events have proven that assumption incorrect. Jessica snatched up the will, her eyes scanning frantically for her name. When she didn't find it, she looked for Brandon's. The longer she read, the more her face twisted with rage. You can't do this, she said finally. You can't leave everything to charity out of spite. I'm not leaving everything to charity, I corrected. I'm establishing a trust fund for my grandchildren's education, managed by independent trustees who will ensure the money is used for legitimate educational expenses. Brandon will receive a modest inheritance, enough to be meaningful, but not enough to fund a lifestyle he can't afford on his own. Brandon was reading over Jessica's shoulder now, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and what might have been relief. How much is modest? $50,000. The rest, approximately $400,000 in assets, will fund college educations for your children and any future grandchildren I might have. Jessica threw the will down like it was contaminated. This is insane. We're your family. We're the ones who'll take care of you when you're old and sick. Really? Based on what evidence? You've already shown me exactly how you'll take care of me when you need money for vacations you can't afford. That's different, Brandon said, though his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Jessica just told me she considers my money to be advance payment on my death. She's literally counting on me dying so she can spend my life savings. How is that different from elder abuse? The question hung between us while they processed the implications. I'd spent 3 days thinking about Jessica's revelation, and every angle I examined led to the same conclusion. They would absolutely steal from me again, probably in increasing amounts as they got older and more desperate. This isn't fair, Jessica said. We made one mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions over several months. You studied my financial habits, stole my credit card information, created fake gambling transactions to support your lies, traumatized me with stories about threats to your safety, and then spent my money while documenting your theft on social media. That's not one mistake, Jessica. That's a criminal enterprise. Brandon finally found his voice. What about the promissory note? Do we still have to pay you back? Oh, absolutely. That debt doesn't disappear just because your inheritance does. You still owe me $17,000 plus interest to be paid over 2 years. So we pay you back money that won't even come to us when you die anyway. Jessica's voice was reaching dangerous octaves. That's correct. You pay me back money you stole because theft has consequences regardless of your future expectations. I stood up, gathering my documents with the satisfaction of someone who just checkmated an opponent. I'll give you both 24 hours to decide whether you want to sign the promissory note or face criminal charges. But either way, my will stands as written. This is vindictive, Jessica spat. You're punishing us for being honest about the inheritance. I'm protecting my assets from people who've proven they can't be trusted with them. The children will get good educations, which is exactly what I would have wanted my money to accomplish. Brandon walked me to the door, his face a mixture of resignation and something that might have been respect. I guess I deserve this, he said quietly. You deserve consequences for your choices, but I agreed. What you do with those consequences is up to you. As I walked back to my house, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly. It's hard to be truly happy when your relationship with your son has been permanently damaged, but satisfied in a way that felt solid and final. Margaret was waiting in my kitchen with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. How did it go? Better than expected. Jessica revealed more than she intended, and Brandon finally saw who he married, and the will changed. The kids will get educations instead of enabling their parents' poor judgment. Margaret raised her glass. To consequences. To consequences, I agreed. 3 months later, I was sipping wine on a terrace in Tuscany, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and amber. I'd booked the trip to Italy using money from the first payment on Brandon and Jessica's promissory note. There was a certain poetic justice in funding my dream vacation with money they were paying back for trying to steal that same dream. My phone buzzed with the text from Brandon. Dad, I signed the divorce papers today. I'm sorry for everything. Maybe when I finish paying you back, we can try to rebuild our relationship. I typed back, maybe we can. Enjoy your fresh start. Some relationships can't be rebuilt, but some people can learn to be better than they were. I'm curious to see which category you'll choose. The waiter brought my dinner, handmade pasta with truffles that cost more than Jessica probably spent on groceries in a week. As I ate, I thought about the man I'd been 3 months ago. Lonely, trusting, eager to be needed, even by people who didn't deserve my generosity. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. I'd finally learned the difference between being a good father and being a doormat. The Italian sunset was worth waiting 67 years to see. Some things are worth the wait, especially when you get to enjoy them with money that was rightfully yours all along. I raised my glass to the sunset, to fresh starts, and to the beautiful truth that it's never too late to stop letting people take advantage of your kindness. The view from the other side of betrayal, I discovered, was absolutely spectacular. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.